I'm Colleen Pepper, and this is, I'm not sure if you're like me, but this is one of my top loves, is all the documents that I got passed down to me from both my mother's side of the family and my father's side of the family, and all the photographs. And I actually got into this and archiving everything because my father was diagnosed with cancer. And in going through that treatment, he wanted to start dividing up the photographs and digitizing the photographs. And so this is just something that I did a lot of study in, and along with teaching it for other students. But we're going to take a look at preserving those family documents and photos. And as I mentioned in the thing, it is the #1 artifact, both #1 and #2 really, that gets passed down and the generations. And troves of information, especially if you're talking documents and letters. And it's just fun to look at and get lost in. It is a guide to help the family historian, individual, or even small organization in the preservation of family documents and photographs. And now, what's nice about documents and photographs is really it's the same process. So except for kind of slight changes in the materials and almost how kind of like you actually preserve, everything is pretty much the same. And it's just meant to be budget friendly because, of course, when I did it for everybody, I'm on a budget. So it's just one of those things to help people out. Of course, the goal in anything in a preservation is turning them in so that they're available for future generations. Even if people, and I know when I worked at the University of Texas Law Library, a lot of people, when they passed away, would send it off to other people. So it's just great to have. It's part of your history, and it's just says who you are, and it gives an idea of into the past, into the picture. What I do have is at the bottom, of course, 2 great resources if you're doing this is the NEDCC and Gaylord. Gaylord I'll talk about a lot because Gaylord, not only it's a great archival place, but you can buy your materials there. And if you have questions, they're able to help you. All right, so timing on the project, that's always important. Before you started on a project like this, is that basically it's based on your household collection. So there's no set time frame and how long it's going to take. How many pictures do you have? How many photographs do you have? How many documents do you have? It's all going to be up to you. My suggestion is in doing this, though, is that you digitize and preserve either in one sitting or in small batches. So you're handling the documents as little as possible, your original artifacts, and then you're digitizing so you can digitize and then preserve, or preserve and then digitize. But you want to do it all in one sitting versus leaving things out, because when you leave things out, you have the potential to destroy, or to basically not necessarily destroy, but it does interfere with the artifacts. You can get dust on it, they can get scratched, you can get, if you have pets, pet dander, so anything can happen in that. It's also important to note that you don't want to rush it. If you feel like you're on a rush or in a time crunch, then do it when there is no rush. I have a picture. My dad, when he first started it, had tried to rush through it and ended up, of course, tearing a bit of the picture out. And of course, it's irreplaceable. So it's just one of those things you do want to keep in mind, in that you just want to be methodical, slow. There is no rush to this. You just want to do it. It's fun. It's just time. It can be time consuming. All right, so the different materials that you want to get. So most of us will recognize the photo box. Photo boxes are okay. They're not archival. They will keep dust out, but they won't keep some of the other elements out. They will definitely not keep bugs out. And so while it is good, a lot of photos that came down were in photo boxes. I found them in chests. I found them in photo albums and scrapbooks. I found them in containers. They were located in the basement, in the attic. So photographs and documents were pretty much all over the place. And that's where, if it's really of importance, then that's what you want to archive them. And while photo boxes are good, they're not the best. But what you do want is you do want cotton gloves, or you can even get the nitrile gloves. Those are like the hospital type gloves. Now, I happen to have a skin sensitivity. So even when I worked with nitrile gloves at the Center for Creative Photography, I'd have to put like big Band-Aids on my wrist, but it's doable. So either one. Cotton is great, but it can get bulky to work with if they're not the right size. As you can see, they're kind of shapeless. So you want to do what's going to be best for you, your documents, and your photographs. You're going to want archival storage boxes and L sleeves and or pocket sleeves. Basically, and we'll get into that later, but photographs and documents pretty much are what protects them are sleeves. It's just a different type of sleeve that you're going to want to get. Pockets are generally photographs. L sleeves are generally documents. You're also going to want to have unbuffered acid-free tissue. Pencils, never have pens around, mainly because the ink can destroy photographs. And ink back, of course, in the 1930s and 1940s is different from the ink that's made today. So a number 2 pencil is always going to be your best bet. You're going to want folders, which are acid-free archival folders. They look like regular manila folders, but the material is different. And that's important for what we're going to get into later in the slides. And then, of course, you'll want your family documents and family photos. As I said, mine kind of came in boxes. So the box below is actually what my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, so we're talking 1920s, those were love letters. And they were mixed in with documents and photographs and a spelling thing that belonged to my grandfather in the 1930s. So just it was all kind of thrown together and put into a box. You want to make sure in getting a look at your sleeves, especially for photographs, you want to get one that is slightly larger or made for your size in the document and photo. So what I love about Gaylord compared to Amazon is that Amazon, you have to hunt and choose. If you do go through Amazon, make sure that it's a print file. They're archival preservers. You can get a lot of photograph sleeves that aren't necessarily archival sleeves, and you want this to last as long as possible. So you do want something that is acid-free, no PVC, and it's considered archival safe. So photographs, again, that's where you're going to have your pocket sleeves, and then documents. And then the tissue paper is one that, again, you want it archival, because people will often use the archival for like packing. They'll think packing tissue is the same as archival tissue, and they're really not. All right, so I did include in here like of course, prices change and they vary, but this kind of gives you a good idea of a costing of your basic materials. Now, what I love is through either Gaylord, and now you can order it through Amazon, but Amazon gets it from Gaylord. But if you're wanting to start out small, Gaylord actually has a history kit, which is how I started. And it's got a document flip top archival case. It has 10 archival folders, 10 pockets. It even comes with its own pencil and even a pair of gloves. And so you kind of get a kit there that's kind of already made that you can start off with. And then you can just kind of build from there. And of course, they have all different kind of archival storage boxes, glove types. And then of course you have the pockets, which are sleeves, and then archival folders. So it kind of gives you the basic of Gaylord and Amazon. Amazon, when I went to go and take a look. Some of the stuff they still carry, some of the stuff they don't. They're kind of in and out. So it's kind of hard to tell with Amazon at times. And as I said, Amazon tends to get a lot of their stuff from Gaylord anyway. So you could just go to Gaylord directly. And Gaylord's always good about getting your stuff in a week. So if you're not in too much a rush, then I always suggest going there first. But that kind of gives you an idea of prices and what you're looking at and what you think you'd want to get and not get. Now, at the top is an archival storage box. It's a 3-inch O-ring. That's basically, I love that, and I've show pictures of it, but it's basically like your old-fashioned photograph album. But instead of, it uses the rings to put everything in versus you're not damaging your photographs and your documents, but you can look through it like you would a photograph album or a scrapbook. And so that's what I happen to love about it. And they do have other sizes besides the 3-inch. Again, what's your needs and what are you looking at? But they do have smaller ones. I think they run from 1.5, 2, and then 3. Okay, so the storage, as you can tell, these are all the different types of sizes that you can get in an archival storage box. So this is the one that comes with your kit, which is the flip folder up, which is like a file folio. The 2 thicker ones are your O-ring binders. And then you have regular photograph style type box, and then different other styles that you can use for both photographs and or documents if you'd like. So again, you want to make sure that the storage matches what you want or need. And you do have to be careful, because I have gotten it to where I've accidentally gotten the wrong size, and then I've had to go back and order another one. You could exchange it out, but ultimately I ended up, because of the project that I was doing, I ended up using it for something else, different documents, or I think even medals. But you just want to, again, find something that's what you need in the size that you need it. Taking a look more in depth on the folders. So L sleeves and pockets. Depending upon what you're going for, you might see that it's a archival pocket or it's an archival L sleeve. So the L sleeve is open on 2 sides. And that's generally what we suggest for documents, because documents, you want to be able to slide it in there a little bit easily. And if you need to, you could always take it out as well. But the pocket is only open on 1 side. So for the majority, photographs are generally pockets, documents are L sleeves. But again, finding something that works for you and is going to make your life easy. What I found with documents is that if I try to use a document in a pocket, normally they're always they're open at the very top. So you're trying to slide in your document, and then the sides kind of get a little bent, or they get a little kind of what I would call wonky, and it doesn't slide in smooth. And you could end up hurting your document depending on if it's brittle or if it's really old, or putting in an extra crease that you didn't want it. So make sure that, again, that's why it's like documents are better for having an L sleeve, because then it's going to slide in a lot easier and do less damage to the document that you're trying to preserve. And then, of course, you want your L sleeves or pockets to be made of polyester, polypropylene, or polyethylene, because these are the things that do not get onto your document or onto your photographs. So as of right now, they're the best in terms of archival standards. Your folders need to be acid-free and linen-free, or lignin-free, and you preferably want to have it buffered. This is why I said they look like regular file folders, but the materials themselves are a little bit different. And so, including in archival envelopes, which is the white one behind it, that you can get, or even the file folders. So you want to make sure that if you're taking the time to preserve it, you might as well get the items that will last the longest. And then, of course, archival boxes. They come in various styles, shapes, colors. You can get beige, gray, black, and it's just preference. For me, color wasn't really a preference, but the material should be acid-free and lower linen-free, metal reinforced corners, and snug enclosures. This what makes an archival box different from a photo box, because if you go back to the photo box, you notice it is an enclosed and it's kind of snug, but it doesn't have the metal reinforcement tabs. And that's what's going to keep the bugs out, is all the ones that are the metal reinforced. It also keeps it from bending, or you can kind of stack things and it's going to keep things in a better shape when you're having those metal reinforced corners. And as I said, the biggest reason for it is bugs. And we're going to talk about the bug situation later, but you want to preserve these for as long as possible and to pass them on to future generations, whether they're your children, grandchildren, or even sending them off to a collection to be housed somewhere else. And the snug enclosures, again, and we'll take a look, is because especially you want to get something as close. If you get a little bit bigger, then you can end up sometimes even stuffing them with your acid-free tissue paper, or to kind of keep it a little bit more snug, depending upon the size of the box. Because I know in terms of scrapbooks, especially from the 1940s and 1930s, all come in a variety of sizes. So there, you really want to try and measure and get something as close as possible. All right, so in preparing for getting ready for preservation or conservation of your photographs and documents, again, the process is exactly the same thing, same as materials. And so with the preparation, you want to have a clean workspace. So the surface should be clean and free of dust and dirt. I generally liked working on the glass because the wood dining room table, even though it was bigger, it was a dining room table and no telling what was on it or in it. And it was just easier with the glass, I could tell. And we did have a glass table in Dad's living room. So I basically worked off of the glass. If you go into an archive or a library, a lot of it's wood. So whichever one that you use, it just needs to be clean and free of dust and dirt. If you have pets, I know that can kind of, and my dad does have cats, so kind of makes it an interesting thing. You may want to put them kind of away during this process, just so you don't have the extra cat hair or dog hair or dander floating around that can get onto the documents or the photographs. And because we know, especially with cats and dogs, they like to help. So you may not want them to help in this case. A good tip is place one of your archival folders or your linen-free, acid-free tissue between the surface and the document or photograph that you're working on. That way you're kind of keeping any residue cleaner or lint or anything that went on the cleaning rag or the paper towel or whatever that you used, and you kind of add that extra buffer. You also don't want any food or drink in the workspace because accidents happen. And I've been in places where, you know, it's like there it went, and if it gets on the artifact, there pretty much isn't a way to get it out of the artifact. And it can also attract bugs later on, or rodents, depending upon the area that you live in. So it's just a good thing not to have it. You also don't want ink or any pens in the area. Pencils are okay, but again, you don't want anything that's ink on it. Documents themselves, you want to make sure that paper clips, staples, and other objects are removed from any of the documents. This is important because they do rust, and especially the wonderful old, especially if you're talking old documents, you want to house them. If you're going to do it like what I did, I put the envelope in one and the letter in another. So it's just a matter of you want to keep everything as preserved as possible when you're archiving everything. So make sure that anything metal is removed. If it's important to it, then put it into its own little L sleeve or pocket and with a note written in pencil that explains it. But for the most part, a lot of our documents with paper clips and everything else, they don't have any sentimental value other than to keep it together. You want to gently unfold any creases. Now, if your paper is brittle, then you can use a humidifier or flattener, and then you can back the document with Japanese washi conservation paper. That means it just kind of sits on it. I used the regular tissue paper on a couple of my documents when I put them next to, kind of not right next to a humidifier, but the humidifier was close by. And it just allows it to be able to kind of make it easier for you to work with. But you do want to make sure that if you are using a humidifier, that as it straightens and everything else, that you make sure that the paper is dry before you put it into the L sleeve or the pocket sleeve. And then at this point, once you've gotten everything in there ready, you can either digitize them first and then go through the process of putting them into the sleeve and then into the storage box or straight into the folder storage box. Or you can preserve it and then come back later and digitize. And it really is up to you. What we did, and it worked out better, was we digitized before we worked on the preservation. So I did it in small batches. So for instance, I'd say, okay, in one sitting, I had like maybe 10 letters with their envelopes. So I went through and did that in an afternoon first, digitize them, prep them, digitize them, and then I worked on archiving them. And then I would put that batch away. And then when I was able to, I'd start in on another batch of papers and photographs. But again, you want to do it. It's up to you on how much time you have and know that you have to spend on it. And a lot of this I did do just sitting in front of a television, unless then I got busy with the documents and then I was reading all the letters. Photograph albums. This was always a fun one. When I got here, Dad had my stepmother in the 80s used to cover arts and crafts with photograph albums. And we were dividing up the pictures on what would go to me and what would go to my sister. And she didn't want I was shipping everything off. So she wanted the photograph albums, but she didn't want the photos in the photograph albums. And then it was also taking them. So what I did find out in working with photograph albums, you want to go through and of course remove any loose photos and photos that are easy to peel off the album. Some, as they said, if it's the magnetic ones of the 1980s, I don't know what they did with them, but sometimes they're like really, really on there. Others, you get them from the 1970s and they're falling out of their sleeves and the protective covering doesn't stay on it. So it's just easier to kind of take them out of the photo album. Now, if it's stuck to the photo album, what you can do is take a very sharp knife, and I would sharpen it occasionally and hold it at an angle towards the bottom part, not up towards the picture, but down towards the backing. And then slide under the corner of the photo and just kind of rotate it. It's a very slow process. If you're not comfortable doing it, I practiced even when I still go and back in when I'm doing my mother's photo albums, then I'll still practice with photos that neither one of us really care about. Either people that she can't remember and I don't know, or ones that she's got duplicates on, and just be able to practice working with it and what it looks like and what it feels like. If photograph albums, as great as they are, they're worse than the scrapbooks in terms of keeping photos. Yes, they keep them there, but they do end up ruining the photos. Plus, because there's some type of material, I know when Elizabeth and I were talking earlier, she had mentioned that she couldn't get them out of the photo album. They were still so stuck on there that she put them on her scanner to digitize. Well, whatever was on that photo album ended up getting onto her scanner. The stickiness or glue or magnetic quality or whatever is in that material, it's just not good for the photograph, and archivists will tell you no. So pretty much now it's like someone mentions photograph albums and I balk, but you can work with it. And there are some pictures that I've archived that still have a little bit of the backing of the photo album on it, and that's okay, because I'd rather have the entire picture with a little bit of the backing, but it's going to be in better condition than if I left it in the photo album. Scrapbooks. My grandmother had a scrapbook, and this is the picture that's below. And it came from the 1930s and 1940s, probably even she had pictures in there from the 1920s. It's kind of, most of them though, I think was from the 1930s and 40s. I did the same thing that I did with the photograph album, and I went through and I took out all the loose ones so that they can be independently archived. For those pictures that wouldn't come off, then what I did do is I don't mind keeping the scrapbook. I had a box for it. And so I put the archival tissue in between the pages. And what it does is it protects the photos that are on the pages from anything else in the scrapbook. So it's an individual protection. And there is a way to take the photos off of the scrapbook, but I would suggest, unless you are a specialized archivist, that you get someone else to do it, or just keep the scrapbook, because it does involve soaking the pages, and basically you're disintegrating the pages and keeping the photos, but then you've got the photographs wet, and there's a process that you would have to go through in terms of drying them and so forth. So really, for the best bet, if you're happy with the scrapbook like I was, I just took out any of the loose ones, any ones that just kind of came off naturally, and then I placed tissue papers in between the thing. The same goes for the photograph album too, as if you're really wanting to keep the photograph album, or the pictures just don't want to stay there and you don't want to risk it, then put the tissue paper in between as well. The archival tissue paper, to me, is almost like my best friend. I use it pretty much for wrapping things if I have to wrap an archival, putting it in between documents, putting it in between photographs, and it really isn't that expensive for the amount that you get. So digitization, and this is always the fun one. It isn't that hard to digitize. A lot of your printers, your home printers now have a scanner in them, and they aren't that expensive. So pretty much that's what I used. I just used Dad and I, because I would have Dad do some of them as well. But we basically just scan them. Sometimes I would take a picture, like if it didn't fit in the scanner, the way our smartphones are now, you could actually take a picture of the picture, take a picture of the picture of the document, and scan it and have it scanned that way. It's not the best necessarily versus scanning it directly, but depending upon the picture or what you've got, that's doable as well, because you're basically keeping a copy of the image. So again, it's a process that can be done before or after you place them in the sleeves or pockets. I always did it beforehand, because then once I got finished, once it's archived, the document's archived, I don't have to touch it hands-on. If I want to look at it, it's protected. If otherwise, it could stay in its archival box and sleeve, and it's protected from anything that's in the air or even me. They do suggest, archives suggest that scans, even if it's a document, you want to save it in a JPEG format and not PDF. PDF isn't bad, but if it's a PDF, it's going to be harder to navigate, negotiate, and a lot of the computers and the smartphones and everything can read a JPEG. And PDF is fine, but I did find JPEG a lot easier to work with and to send to relatives or to burn onto CDs, because I still, like my uncle and older relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins, still use CDs versus flash drives. And so it's just easier to navigate. Once you have your digital copy, it's suggested that you save a copy and house it in a different location. So in essence, you're almost having two different. And the reason I say that is because you'll notice, like, I saved mine to a passbook, which is the red one here in the corner. And it's a good thing, because the computer where I had put one copy of stuff fried in an electrical storm, it went bye-bye. But luckily I had it in a passbook. And so I generally keep things in 2 or 3 locations. With digitization, just because you have it saved, like even though it's in the red passbook, a lot of my stuff is going on that 5-year mark. So I'm already looking at, okay, what other passbook or something do I want to get where I can start transferring all of these photos back to a new, I have to migrate them from one place to another place, because basically your internal or external hard drive will go bad. As wonderful as digitation is, you're still looking at something hard that can fail what it's in. And so you want to make sure that you're migrating your information every 5 or 6 years. And you can kind of tell, because like they'll begin to make weird, like my red passbook, I know it's time because it's beginning to make weird sounds when I put it in to the computer. So again, you can use a flash drive, but it is not suggested because it could get lost. And I lose my flash drives all the time. So, it's just up to you, on if you do it. Now, cloud-based servers are great. Like you've got OneDrive, you've got Google Drive, you've got all these drives that you can pay money for. And that's well and good. And it is good. But if you read the fine print, which, like me, I don't know if you're like me, and I tend to never do, they do have the ability to use your archival assets. That means that they can use your pictures, they can use your documents, they can have access to them. And so that may be something you're going, no. So you may want to go ahead and buy an external hard drive that you can save things on, like my sister and brother-in-law have. Again, it's up to you. It's what you feel comfortable with. They are great. You can access them from different places, but again, they have the ability to access it. All right, so in actually preserving your documents, so after you've digitized and you want to, say, get them ready for the preservation part, here are the steps. Really easy. It works the same for both photographs and documents. That's often why a lot of times you'll get both. Even an archivist will know how to do both, because the process and the steps are the same. You want to wash your hands with soap and then dry them. I've always used paper towels so that lint doesn't get onto my hands. Normally, I always use a towel, but if I know I'm going to be archiving, you want to use probably like a paper towel or something that is lint-free as possible. You don't want to use lotion, because lotion's going to get onto the artifacts, even with gloves on, even with whatever, that it could be a scent, it could be the grease, it could be the oils, whatever could get onto the artifact and damage the artifact. You want to go ahead and then put on your gloves. In this case, I've used cotton gloves because, as I said, since it was my own personal one, I didn't use the nitrite because of the skin sensitivity. But if there are multiple pages, what I did do is, you kind of can tell, I snipped off a small part of the fingertip. So I have just a small part of my fingertip that can hold on to the document if I'm needing it. If the pages are too brittle, then don't use gloves at all. Or you can use the nitrate if you want to. But again, you want to be very careful, because if it's brittle, as you can tell when you work with brittle documents, is that sometimes the slightest touch can cause it to flake off. And that's happened to a couple of documents that I've had. And so you want as little pressure or anything until you're able to sleeve that particular document as possible. Then you can place your document or photo in your L-sleever pocket. And again, make sure you have the correct size. You want something that is the same size, or in case always a little, sometimes a little bit bigger, so that if you do have to access that document, or you're not going to hurt it with the edges trying to get it in and out. So you do want some overlap if possible. And then you can place it, once you have it sleeved, you can place them in your folder, then in the proper storage container, or just the actual storage container. Now, newspapers, the best practice is digitize and throw them away, because what you want in the newspaper is just what's the information actually there. It's up to you. My grandmother had a whole scrapbook of newspaper articles of her, of my granddad, of her sons, my dad and my uncle growing up, family. So really, I digitized them, but it was still kind of more sentimentality, harder for me to get rid of them. But best archival practice says you make a copy of it, you do scan it, then you make a hard copy of it, and then you keep that for the records, and then you throw away the newspaper. But really, again, what I simply did was kept the newspaper and then put the tissue in between it, again on the scrapbook, and then just left it as was. Again, that one, you kind of get people having various issues when it comes to the newspaper. So these are the ways, the difference. So now everything is pretty much sleeved, but some of the sleeves I fit into just the regular folder. So this one is, and you want to have it labeled in pencil for you so that you can be able to find them. This one was the scrapbook, and you notice the scrapbook is actually, the box was the smallest that could fit the scrapbook. It was the only size that could fit it. So what I did do was, actually this part is made up of some other artifacts that I've gone, like some patches and some other things that can keep the scrapbook from moving around per se. But you can see the tissues kind of sticking out of it. This is the O-ring binder in the corner. And you notice that, like you could see, this one has the 4, this pocket has 4, that pocket's 4, but the one behind it actually has 2. And that's just simply because when I put these photographs together, I was generally trying to go more for decades than I was for trying to organize it. I tried to organize it by decades. And then these are an archival photo box, which have the more recent. So as you can tell, like 1997. So a lot of these pictures are the ones with my kids, and ones that will get split up. They're the more modern ones, but again, they're sleeved. But all of these things have also been digitized. So things I have here, but it's to keep it in mind. So you do have the environment that you have to keep it, because the environment in Arizona is totally different than Louisiana, which is different than Texas. And Texas, you've got 5 different places that could be different. If you live in Indiana, then that's different. So you have to take into consider what is your environment. And remember, I mentioned that all these things, like, well, in Texas, where I lived, at least in Central, we don't have basements because of the ground, and you just don't have basements, but we have attics. So things were found in attics. But in the East, on the East Coast, I know, like, my sister and her husband have a basement. And so what's the environment of your place? So what's the lighting like? Again, documents and photographs are pretty much the same thing. So things and temperature, generally the best thing to do is in a cool, dark place. Where I keep all of the storage boxes is I have hijacked a shelf out of the linen closet of my father's house. And Same with my mother when I was over there and archiving her stuff. Basically, I hijacked one of their linen shelves and I stacked everything. So it's not on the ground, it's not high, it's not around humidity. Storage closets are also a good place, but people like to use their closets. So again, it's just, how much space do you have and the best place that you want to keep it. Okay, so you do want to keep it documents and letters. So you do want it to have low light. If you're pulling stuff out, then you don't want to keep it out. You kind of want to use it and then put it away whenever you're finished with it as soon as possible. You got to take a look, of course, into humidity, temperature. So what is your area like? Louisiana is extremely high humidity. Texas can be humidity. Arizona really only gets humid in the monsoon season and only at certain parts. So again, it's, basically what is it like and where's the best place that you think that you want to have it. And that may also determine what size boxes are you going to get. What are you going to do? You may start off with, like when I started off, it was what's the most important things that I want to keep. And obviously Born Digital and the more recent ones were maybe not so much the ones that I had to have right away versus the stuff that came from the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s that belonged in the past. So, what's the thing? And obviously, like my courtship letters from my great grandparents were falling apart. So those needed to be archived fairly quickly. Another thing to keep in mind is pollutants. Obviously, pollutants can be dirt, sand, oil. It can encourage mold, fungi. This is why we say no food or drink around in the area. Things that can cause even putting away your pets while you're working on this, because they love to help. And you don't want that pet dander getting mixed in with your archives because it can be an abrasive. It can be an abrasive on the document. Air pollutants, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, hydrogen sulfide. Materials can become discolored and brittle. My grandparents were chain smokers, so a lot of their stuff has yellowed with age. It also has a smell. So I had to kind of go through a process of airing them, freezing them to try and get rid of the pollutants that were there. Basically, we would call it quarantine while you're trying to fix the issue. But even those items I kept in a separate box than the other ones, because I knew that maybe there were pollutants in there that I hadn't gotten maybe rid of, or that they still could be there. Pests is another big one, and people really kind of don't think about it, but of course different pests range what is there and what is not. Like I know like ants are really big in Central Texas, especially fire ants. Here in Arizona, not so much, but rodents could be a big thing. They love the corners, which is why the boxes have the metallic. Silverfish is huge. I know in the Texas area, I'm not sure if it's in Indiana, what the bug population is there, but silverfish do a lot of damage, like especially in Texas. And of course, if you get even rodents, I'm sure everywhere, then you're looking at that. Ants as well. They eat the paper, the text, the images. They can tear paper apart. They stain the paper. So this is why it's also suggested that it's in a dark, dry place up off the floor, because even, spiders can get in and do damage. So you just kind of want to have things that, are up and off the floor, cool and dark place, and check them occasionally as such. But these are just things, again, you have to keep in mind, because every place is different and everybody deals with different bugs. And these are things that can damage your artifacts. And I'm sure, like most of us, we don't have a designated freezer, cold vault storage area that we can deal specifically and put all of these items into, like a nice library or, Smithsonian or one of those other wonderful places. Another thing to also keep in mind is you want to have a plan for disasters. Yes, it's great that everything is digitized. It may be that you have everything digitized and maybe you keep that digitization or that passbook in with your important documents that you have ready to go. A lot of people already have like a firebox or someplace where they keep their social security card or their birth certificate or things that they know that they have to grab and go should a natural disaster occur. But maybe have your passbook with those things that are digitized, or maybe have the items that social security and everything with your archival storage boxes so that, those are going to be the first things to go. So for instance, I know should anything happen here, then all of my archived storage boxes are in one area and they're ready to go. And so if it looks like there's going to be, a fire and natural disaster, of course, obviously, if there's something that you're leaving in the middle of the night and you're not going to grab the things, but you may have, of course, as I said, you may keep the passbook so at least you have your digital pictures or documents. But it's just a nice thing to keep in mind. So what's the risk assessment? You want to remove or reduce your danger, put it in writing, ensuring knowledge of all personal documents, regular updating, multiple copies, and have a response recovery plan. Obviously, some of these won't necessarily work, but you want to have as many of them. Like anything else, a lot of people have, okay, if they know like they're in hurricane country, they already have a to-go prepared bag. At least my uncle does. He lives in Florida. So he's already got like, if I have to leave, this is what I do and this is where I go. My granddad lived in Louisiana. He had the same thing. I lived more in the tornado area. So it was a different type of situation. But again, what am I going to take with me? And just have something in mind or keep that in mind. So you're not losing the artifacts that you've helped to preserve or spend this time with. And of course, there is time, pack those up like people want to take their photo albums. Your life is more important. But if you have the time, you have the ability, you have a plan in place, then you can get those things that you won't regret later. So here are just some pictures of the things that they finally got. So again, another of the O-ring binder. As I said, I liked this one because it was easier, especially if I take it to go see my kids or when they go, we can access, they can see and look at them and everything is preserved. Again, so a lot of the documents, and these are just ones, they're sleeved, but they're in folders. They're just in a simple box compared to an O-ring. Of course, this is one of the documents I was telling you about that was brittle and was kind of falling apart and splitting in places. And so really trying to save it. It was the 1924 marriage license of my great-grandparents. Again, to show. Now, what I like about the photo sleeves is like these are the 2 5x7 ones. And then these are, even from like the 1960s where you had the small square ones, they have sleeves that can fit for those pictures. So you can get sleeves that match. What I did first is I went through and I kind of, besides doing it by decade, I went and saw, okay, what am I seeing a lot of? And I was seeing a lot of, maybe not so much 5x7, but when I got to the 60s, I was seeing a lot of these, I don't know if they're 3x3 but the square photos. And so just kind of working from there. And so take a look, your photos, which ones that you want to preserve the most starting forward. I started back and then moved forward. So getting sleeves at first that I had the majority of photographs first. And then digitized photos, whether they're born and we call either things are born or they're scanned. So if it's a born digitization, then those are ones that are automatically, like you take with your camera phone, and they're automatically created in the digital world. And then of course you have those that are scanned that come from the analog world. But whether it's born or scanned, you want to transfer them every 5 years so that you're not losing them and you're not losing the ability, because once that machine that it's housed in goes, it's gone. Anything that's in it is gone. So you want to make sure that if the machine is gone, then your pictures are in another machine that is working. And so right now, the Archive World, Smithsonian, the NEDCC, and NARA, the National Archives Records Association, say you want to transfer about every 5 years. And then that way your machine is brand new and is being transferred onto a brand new machine versus something that is considered already out of date. That's just the thing that I sent, because everything, all the pictures and everything were ones from my family, documents, photographs, everything. List of references, of course, so you can take a look at, the NEDCC is the Northeast Document Conservation Center. But that's it for mine, and I'll go ahead and stop share.
First question, it's one that's often up for debate. A lot of conservationists now recommend freshly washed hands over gloves. What are your thoughts?
Both.
Yeah.
Working as an archivist, you always want to wash your, that's why I said you want to wash your hands before, because you don't know what's going to transfer onto a document. So even if you wash your hands, then you still have the idea of the oils from your own personal body that are going through. I always suggest both. Now, even when I worked in the archives, they moved to the nitrite gloves versus the cotton gloves. But again, because I have a skin sensitivity and I don't feel like putting Band-Aids on my wrist every single time, then I used cotton and would clip off a little bit of the fingernail. The reason they suggest, some will say the hands, is because they say lint, or they say you want to feel, if you feel it, you can tell how much pressure to put on it, which is true. I would say do both. You know your documents and your photographs better than anybody.
You also know yourself better than anybody. If you're someone like me who has not the best fine motor skills, like gloves make life hard for me.
Yeah.
But, do what seems right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're your documents, your photos, and you know them better than anybody else does.
Somebody was saying that they have photos and documents stored in archival boxes with punch-out handles. What should I store those boxes in to protect them from dirt and debris and moisture and things?
Archival, if they've got the punch out, then maybe they just want to slip them into maybe a slightly bigger archival box. But ultimately, you want one that I've shown that has the metal handles, or the metal corners on them. That's a must, and it's a snug enclosure, meaning that when you close the lid, it's not going to pop back up, flip out. It's snug and it stays enclosed. So if you want to keep the archival, then I would maybe buy something that's a little bit bigger, but you definitely don't want an archival box that has any holes in it.
Somebody else was asking, well, they were saying that they were at another archival presentation, and the person giving the presentation suggested that you do not store, say, a letter, something that's folded, open, saying not to store it open and to keep it as an original form. So could you share some of the pros and cons of keeping something folded, or is unfolding them flat?
I unfolded them because they were mine. And basically, if it's brittle, then you really don't want to unfold it.
Yeah.
And that's why they kind of, if you're up, you can kind of do like the humidity, because that will add enough moisture that maybe you can unfold it. I my letters, I like to read. They were courting letters. They gave me an insight into the 1920s. He was going on a train to World War I. I mean, you know, the words that they use. So I had mine open. They often, and again, it's kind of like with the marriage certificate, it was closed and it was brittle, but I opened it up very gently, very delicately. You know your documents better than anybody. If obviously you're working with the Smithsonian and it's a George Washington letter, well, maybe they would want it closed because, you know, just to keep it in as condition as possible. But there are pros and cons to both, but really it's the type of paper and if it's brittle or not brittle. If it's brittle and you really think it's going to fall apart, keep it closed.
Somebody was asking about fire resistance boxes. There's actually a couple people who asked about it. So like those fireproof boxes, are they good? Are they bad? I was under the impression that they create their own little ecosystem in there. Yeah. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I have a firebox, and in my firebox, I do keep my most the hard documents, like, of course, if a divorce decree or a marriage decree or those important documents there. But it's in terms of archiving, no. In terms of the archiving situation, absolutely not. I may do, if I know that in my firebox, I'm going to grab the box and go. And fire resistance, fireproof really depends on the temperature of the fire and what type of fire. To be honest, that's the major difference between fireproof, fire resistance is the temperature of the fire. But the whole point is that if you have to evacuate quickly and you can't grab your documents, supposedly they would be there. And so that's why I say if you have a firebox or you have a fire resistant, I keep my passbook in there. That way I know photographs are going to go with me if I grab it and go, or they'll be safe, relatively speaking, as much as any other document would in there. But for archival purposes, no. They're just done basically, once again, that's if there's a fire in your house and you have to evacuate quickly and you need your documents to hopefully make it through the fire.
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't do anything against making it against a flood.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know,
yeah, that doesn't help you.
Yeah, you have to know where you live.
What resolution do you typically scan photos and documents? Also, any scanners you recommend or scanning apps you recommend?
For the most part, in terms of scanners, do look at the reviews. Now mine was, I did it on Dad's and it was perfectly fine. It was an older model. And I think it was already, it's going on like 7 years. So for the printer, and it was good for its time. The nice thing about digital is that you can kind of change how it is. When I did the scanner, every scanner is different. So I kind of played around with the different resolutions to find out what was the best one for my scanner. So to say if there's a specific one, no, I just kind of took one of my, basically I took something that, you know, it wasn't a prized possession, but it was, you know, but tested it out to see, okay, did I like the scanning resolution on this? And that's when I realized that it's like I like JPEG over PDF because I couldn't change things like I can with the JPEG and compared with a PDF. And sometimes you need to make a document brighter. Sometimes you need to make a photograph brighter. And so you can do that with JPEG and you can't do that with a PDF. Sometimes it's just the PDF scans it dark and it's dark and there you can't change the resolution. So I would, as for a type of scanner, take a look, do the research. I mean, ask even, you know, your IT person at work, they are great beneficial people to go, okay, hey, I'm looking at doing a scanner for this project. What's the best kind? And, you know, do the work on it and find the best one within your budget. And, but as I said, I even took some of the photographs with a smartphone. They sometimes take better pictures. And it was just, okay, what's my purpose for it? And if it's, you know, and sometimes I had to do the camera because of size or something else like that. And so I could scan it with a camera, and that worked just as well as scanning it with a scanner. So again, you know, I wish I could say, but it's more like technology changes so fast that when we go to look for a scanner, then we will look for someone that's more like this. But really, it's just playing around with it and finding what's the best resolution for you.
I'm glad you brought up the whole JPEG thing, because there were a couple people who are like, but we thought TIFF was like the thing to scan at and then convert it to a JPEG. So there was somebody asking like along those lines, is there like a problem with TIFF?
I don't see that there's a problem. I go by best practices, and NEDCC, the Center for Creative Photography, which is where I did my internship and worked as an archivist, they always said JPEGs. So, and it could be, again, it's just a matter of, you're going to want something that can transfer across different modalities. So I could scan a picture in here, and if someone else can't read it,
yeah,
then what's the good of sending it to a relative that doesn't have the capacity to read that particular, to have that particular item. And so right now they do say JPEG, and part of the reason is if you're scanning one, and then so if you're doing TIFF, but then you have to redo it to JPEG, you're going to lose. It's all made up of ones and zeros, but you're going to lose information in that coding. You're going to lose coding information. You lose coding information anyway, anytime you're transferring, but especially if you're going from one, even like people notice that when they go from a Word document to a Google Doc, it changes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens when you do TIFF to JPEG. It may be minuscule, you may not know it, but information coding does get changed.
Somebody was asking about using those sheet protectors that you buy at like Sam's Club or office supply stores that say that they're acid free.
I wouldn't trust.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm one of those that, since these are my treasures and these are my artifacts, and yes, I am all for a budget. Trust me on that one. And it's like I'm all for saving money. No, I would, as I said, Gaylord will actually give you discounts if you ask. And I'm not saying that just, I don't have anything to do with Gaylord other than the fact I love them, and I can find everything I need there for this project or when I'm working on this. And they've got great people and great help. And same with the NEDCC, you can look them up online and get great information. I just don't trust it. I'm one of those skeptics. I just can't. They're my treasures. I just can't do it.
Let's remember, everybody, it's not like some kind of government agency is overseeing the use of the word acid free. Just because it says it's acid free doesn't mean it is. Yeah.
And as someone pointed out in the chat, Gaylord is very reputable.
Oh yeah.
And just very reasonably priced. And it's one of those, and that's why I said with Amazon, the print file, and I even showed the name of that on one of the slides, that I know is perfectly well, because that's what we use in the Center for Creative Photography for when we are rehousing photographs for archive purposes. So print file is a great brand. So even if you're doing Amazon, print file is a great brand that is very trustworthy, and we use it in the archives.
Right. Yeah, somebody else was saying
Hollinger,
Hollinger is another
okay,
great one.
yeah.
Yeah.
There was another one that's really great, but it's in the UK.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't quite work well for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you, Colleen, for such a great presentation.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Now, just as one final reminder to everybody, if you need a copy of a handout or if you have more questions, please send us an email. Our email is genealogy@acpl.info. And Colleen, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, great. Thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much. Bye.
Bye.